Welcome and thank you for joining the Where Does Your Seed Come From webinar series. Today, the webinar is entitled Northern Latitudes, Sourcing and Selecting and Saving Seeds from Similar Climates. And this is part of a webinar series. And so over the past few months, we've explored variety trials, open pollinated and hybrid vegetable seed systems, and the field crop seed system. And today we'll be hearing from three presenters sharing their experience on this topic of sourcing seeds internationally from similar climates. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge the indigenous seed keepers whose care and knowledge have preserved the crop diversity we benefit from today. Across Turtle Island and beyond, they have safeguarded seeds, stories, and traditions. As we reflect, we can consider how to support seed sovereignty through caring for seeds, supporting language and cultural revitalization, engaging with land back initiatives, and sustaining traditional knowledge. So let this guide our conversation today, inspiring curiosity, care, and respect for justice and sovereignty in seed systems. We'll have four speakers actually today. Andrew and Sarah from Adaptive Seeds in Oregon, who will introduce the notion of latitude and geography and reflect on their seed ambassador travels through Northern, Central, and Eastern Europe over a decade ago. Theo from Carrick Seeds will do a demonstration on how he navigates the NordGen gene bank, so the Northern European gene bank, and discuss his interest for gray peas. And finally, we'll have Heather Ramsey from Nami farm in BC, who will share about her farm's motivations and how they go about sourcing seeds from Japan. So I will invite Andrew and Sarah to share their screen and presentation.
As Hugo said, we're Sarah and Andrew from Adaptive Seeds. We are talking today about sourcing seeds from similar climates and specifically from some of our origin story with the Seed Ambassadors Project, where we traveled to 9 countries in Northern and Eastern Europe and collected seeds. Unfortunately, given the time constraints here, we don't have a whole lot of time to tell the story of that trip, but instead we're going to talk about a few specific crops and lessons that we learned. So just a little bit about us and where we're coming from. We are in Sweet Home, Oregon. That's about 44 degrees north latitude. So that's somewhere between Montreal and Toronto latitude-wise. And our growing seasons are quite mild. You can see our lows are -9 C and summer highs are about 30 C, although we do have some days that are quite a bit warmer than that. And we are also characterized by an arid growing season, so we often don't get any rain during the growing season. And our growing season is May 15 to October 15, not necessarily because of frost, but because of rain. So
yeah, it gets really cold down to 15, enough to maybe kill some brassicas over winter, but we get a lot of rain in the winter and no rain in the summer, which is quite nice for growing a lot of vegetable and flower and herb seed varieties.
There we go. So over the winter of 2006 and 2007, we were working on we were seasonal farm workers at that time, and we were really interested in winter vegetables. And so we took our winter seasonal unemployment and our life savings, and we traveled Europe and collected varieties. We were specifically looking for new varieties of kale and spinach. And so we chose countries that we thought would be sort of centers of origin and diversity for those crop types.
Yeah, and also we were just like, we had some contacts from the Seed Savers Exchange list of the yearbook, so we contacted them and they found places for us to go. It was really our first few contacts we made in Europe, which was really great. We ended up collecting a lot of varieties, like I think it was 800 varieties on the first trip, and we we legally imported them back into the country, at least the first time we tried. That was kind of silly, but yeah, it was a really big learning experience as very new. We were very new to seed at the time and hadn't had our own farm or had our own seed company yet, just working on other people's farms. And it was kind of we learned a lot, and we look back on that time as being very naive.
We really are very passionate about open source seed and believe that seed it should be for sharing. And so one of our objectives we like to talk about, excuse me, bringing biodiversity back is one of our catchphrases. And we really want the seed that we grow and share to be further taken by other people and adapted to their regions and shared some more. So
yeah, so like collecting seed along the way, and it was so much seed and so many gifts that we, yeah, sure. Yeah. There was a lot of people just gave seed to us. We gave seed to them. It was just this really great sharing experience. Everywhere in the world, there seems to be people that want to share seeds with each other. It's a very universal language that we found. And we want to continue that gift of being able to provide seed in the public domain for other people to save seed on. So that's kind of how we ended up starting Adaptive Seeds, was that like it kind of snowballed into how do we get these seeds out to more people. And we eventually ended up being able to start our own farm. We were growing vegetables for market for a while, but transitioned to only doing seeds over a decade ago. So we've been growing seeds and selling seeds for 15 years or more. And Adaptive Seeds has ended up with maybe, was it 700 varieties in the catalog at this point. Some come and go. But yeah, and we still grow about 80% of those seeds on our farm ourselves. And the last 20% to round out the catalog, we do some contracting and purchase some seeds.
Yeah. So, on our travels, we went looking for kales, we found kales, but we didn't have the resources to isolate all of these varieties. And so we crossed them together into what we think is a beautiful and compelling mix that we call the Kale Coalition, which is what you're looking at here. And this is one of the strategies that we like. Adaptive Seeds, we offer several sort of diverse gene pool mixes. We find that biodiversity increases the chances of success when conditions are not ideal. I'm sure everybody is familiar with that concept. But I think, we were lucky with the kale because it's very hardy. It's from similar latitudes. We didn't, this is a crop that we had no problems with seed production once we brought it home to Oregon. So
yeah, and latitude and longitude is not necessarily the main reason why that these varieties are like some varieties do better than others. So we wanted to talk about how there's a lot of other factors that go in, and latitude and longitude are kind of a proxy in a way for possible success. So you want to start this one?
Sure, yeah. So there's a whole host of biological considerations. Hugo asked us to speak to this. So they sort of include, there's the bullet points here, day length and photoperiod. So this affects both overall growth and flower initiation for some varieties. For biennials, the winter survival can be important. Where we live, most of the time, biennials can overwinter in the field just fine. That's not the case for where everybody else lives.
But it is important to always screen for, like, is it hardy enough to go through winter, or is it something you have to dig and store in a cellar or a greenhouse over winter? Different varieties of the same crop can have quite different ranges of survivability.
So, of course, there's vernalization and cool temperatures. So sometimes varieties that are not used to cool temperatures can get vernalized, which triggers premature bolting in areas with cool springs. So that's a consideration. We also have pollen survival and successful fertilization. So our friend and mentor, John Navazio, often spoke of what is it? Pollination is recreation, fertilization is procreation.
And understanding the difference can be important for seed growing, because just because a flower has been pollinated doesn't mean it's going to make a seed. So we'll talk a little bit later about a crop that we had trouble with having it set seed in our climate, even though the crop grew great for us.
Overall days to maturity, that's kind of a no-brainer, I think. And then humid versus arid growing season is also something that is really important to consider with seed production.
And that can be related to longitude, but also just climate of the area. So one example is spinach often flowers faster at lower altitudes, latitudes, and a lot of spinach growing for seed production is grown in areas where you can get a really high yield. And for example, like if you grew spinach seed crop in California, it might only grow 2 feet tall, but if you grow it up in the Skagit Valley or up in BC, it might become like a Christmas tree. So there's considerations for different crops and how they produce seed, whether or not to grow and select for quality in different areas may be different than those considerations. So you might want to just ignore the fact that it does better at different latitudes.
So right, latitude can be very important for certain crops, not all crops, but certainly with bulbing onions, I think most growers are familiar with this concept. We sourced this red onion, we call the Nagy red onion, from a place in Romania that's in Transylvania. It's 46 degrees north latitude. And this onion is really famous as in the Slow Food Arc of Taste. And you can see the community has a big festival for the onion and is in a competition with a community in Poland for the Guinness World Record longest onion braid. So that's what this photo is. And so for some crop types, it can be very important to source from a similar latitude. We've tried onions from shorter day length southern latitudes and not had such easy success, although
yeah, some onions you just plant them and they're never going to do anything for you depending on where they're from and where you're at. But we found that onions often have a gene pool within a variety that can adapt to different areas too. So it's never like a 100% the onions won't work. You could take a southern onion and try to produce it and select it for bulbing in a northern area and maybe have success. It just might take many generations of selection. So this slide is a little bit of like how complicated things can get when talking about photoperiodicity, or is it days to maturity, or like are there other things happening that cause different crops to flower or have success or not? So sorghum is an interesting example of something that can be very day length sensitive in order to flower. And it also has if it's hot, it can produce quicker or slower. It's kind of a days to maturity or kind of a proxy for like tends to be what happens in most situations. But it's a kind of pointing towards what a plant can do, but it can be like heat accumulation, or it could be photoperiod, or it could be stress, or like at a certain point in the crop's development, at a certain leaf count, it can trigger something. So it can get really complicated, and there's a lot of different forms of day length sensitivity, and it would take too long to get into that. But I think it's important to realize that something like, for us, we could plant a Jalisco sorghum from Mexico, northern Mexico, and this one was, and we plant it out, we water it twice, and then we just cut the water and dry farm it all summer. And that drought stress overrides some of its day length sensitivity, and it can bolt and flower for us reliably. But if we were to water it all summer, it would grow 12 feet tall and never quite mature. So there's a lot going on, and you just have to try stuff.
Wait, I'm gonna just say a little word about this map. I mentioned that a lot of people on the call are familiar with this concept of corn heat units. And so this is just showing the prairie provinces, and it's used this map is showing accumulated temperatures from April to October to determine suitable corn variety maturity. And there's this fabulous map that we found that, again, I hope you all know about, but that's at climateatlas.ca. That's interactive and shows, among other things, the corn heat units, which can sort of help guide using temperature as a proxy for days to maturity. It's a pretty fabulous resource.
Yeah.
Oh no.
It'll work.
Okay.
Great.
Great. But just to say that latitude, just because something comes from a similar latitude doesn't guarantee that it will work. So this is one of our favorite varieties that we collected on our trip. It's called Leamington Winter Giant Cauliflower, and it's an overwintering type, which is a delicacy and can only be grown in relatively mild winter climates. And for us, this variety produces just the most amazing cauliflower. Tastes like cashews almost. It's so good. And it grows for vegetable for us really well. But unfortunately, it doesn't flower until July, where our temperatures are just too hot for successful fertilization to happen.
And we heard that a lot of brassica pollen can desiccate at temperatures over 80 degrees Fahrenheit, which 26 degrees Celsius. And it gets pretty dicey when you really want, like, everything went so great and then it just doesn't make seed. So seed suitability is important as well, considering what will grow well. So this is something we tried so many times and just quit. We even tried planting it on the Oregon coast a few times and had other issues, but yeah. There's a variety that Uprising Seed up in Washington State grows called Prestige, which we've been excited that they can produce seed of that. It's an excellent variety in their climate up in Washington. Okay, so another important, just like basic consideration is it a short season variety or not? Is it quick to mature? So like we found in like sourcing seed in Denmark and Germany that a lot of their tomatoes that they liked for short season climates were Russian and Siberian varieties. And so we kind of took that and ran with it as well, and found that like in Oregon, doing outdoor tomato seed production in a shorter season, trying to get as big of a harvest before the rains start, we found that a lot of Siberian tomatoes did really, really well. And that was a fun, easy thing to figure out, is that even though Siberia might not be a climate analog for us, the short season was like a priority. So like the focus was on a short, cooler season growing conditions and also still have good tasting, good yields. So we can grow like classic varieties like Brandywine or the bigger slicers here and get some harvest, but they never yield a lot and they never quite taste good because they don't have that hot, humid summer for flavor to develop. So the Siberian stuff has been a great alternative.
So finding short season varieties has been really helpful for us. And we've learned along the way that a short season is a short season, and there are some plants that are adapted to a short season for reasons other than cold and wet, that really have transferred well to our conditions. And so our favorite example of this is Burmese okra, which we were interested in growing okra and tried for years. This is one of the takeaways. We're really, getting seed from a similar latitude and a similar climate is a good place to start. And we're most excited about sort of pushing the boundaries with that and trying to find varieties that maybe struggle and sort of helping them to be able to be grown and be grown for seed where we live. So after, I don't know, too many failures with okra, we finally figured out a combination of genetics and growing practices that helped us succeed. And so with this Burmese variety, it's a short variety, and it's short season as well as short in stature. which helps it to be able to produce in our conditions, which okra loves humidity and a lot of heat. And though we have warm days, our nights are pretty chilly and tropical plants stop growing when it gets cold. So
yeah, having 40-degree nights is not okra's favorite environment. But it was great because it's one of those things where like you could grow okra here a little bit, but you could never get a good seed harvest like at the end of the season. So this was also important for seed production and suitability in that. We found a lot of Thai varieties grow well for us. We have a connection to Thailand that is important, but to us, and it's interesting what does translate.
And sort of in a similar way, with the Siberian tomatoes that we love because they're early in our sort of cooler conditions, we've had customers in places where it's really, really super hot reach out and say, I love your early tomatoes because I can grow them in, like, Oklahoma was one of the people that most tomatoes don't pollinate because it's too hot there. But then our tomatoes, because they're early, will pollinate before it gets too hot for pollination to occur. So they're able to have a tomato harvest where otherwise it can be quite difficult during the growing season.
Okay, so longitude can matter too, kinda. I like to talk about my favorite side of continents is the west side because I don't do very well in hot, humid places. So we found that different parts of the world have different precipitations and different levels of humidity. So this map is kind of I was trying to figure out the story of the 100th parallel, the meridian that kind of divides the continent in half as far as what's humid and what's dry. But I found this total precipitation map from May through October. And it's interesting how like we get tons of rain all winter and we have more rain than most places in the country, but the summer's so dry and so warm that that's the key information for us to know. So looking for other places that have a dry, warm summer is a nice thing to think about. And oftentimes it's the west side of a continent, not always, but it can be as simple as that. This little squiggly line was my I just arbitrarily chose like 15 inches of rain or 10 inches of rain. But I decided that was the place that was most similar to us, like for the summertime. It's hard to grow seed when it's pouring rain and high humidity and there's a lot of mold and stuff all over. So we're grateful that we don't always have to deal with that, mostly just in the winter when it's cold and wet.
I was going to say, or so we've been told, because we're blessed to be where it's arid when most seed is drying down.
Yeah.
Great. Look, we made it almost to the end. So I think in conclusion, latitude and longitude are not the whole story, but definitely a good place to start when thinking about sourcing seeds from other places. But accumulated temperatures, day length, photoperiod, winter survival, pollen survival, there's all of these biological considerations that also go into it. And it's really is worth a shot no matter what, I think.
Yeah, like we didn't know much of this when we started. We just collected as many things as we could and trialed everything and saw what did well and what didn't do well and figured out why over time. So you could just trial it more than you would otherwise, and you would reap the rewards.
And if it doesn't work, try again and again and again. And maybe the climate will change.
Yeah, great.
Okay, I think that's it. I don't know if there were questions, if you wanted to do that
at
or
the end.
save till the end.
Yeah, we'll save them to the end. Thank you, Sarah.
Okay.
Thank you, Andrew.
Awesome.
And now we'll leave Theo to share his screen.
Yeah, and I will say I'm over on the east side of the continent there, Andrew. And So it's just interesting comparing your description. I would say we're a bit colder here and tend to have evener rainfall through the summer, which, as you said, is a challenge. And so it shapes what crops we grow and what seeds we grow. So mine is, I'm going to focus a little on gene banks. And maybe my mistake was, unlike you, I started the seed company and then was looking around for seeds, and I don't travel much. And so gene banks for me are a way to travel and find seeds without actually traveling. So a bit about me, Theo. And I'm part of a small subsistence farming family, and we work multi-generationally with a couple of different businesses we help each other with, and seed is my specialty. So we have a 100-acre farm and have about an acre of gardens, but it's broken up into 4 pieces, isolated across the farm, and then the rest is forest and wetland and hay and pasture land for my parents' beef cattle. And I've done seed for about 5 years of selling online and mail order as well. And we do packets of seed. And basically, we don't have a whole lot of specialized equipment for seed for sale. It's just seed is our subsistence, and we grow extra and sell it. But with the gene bank work, it can be a big topic. I have done a number of projects involving gene banks, and I can talk about those later if people are interested. But for this one, I'm basically going to talk a little generally and run through a case study of one particular project I did involving NordGen, which is the gene bank for the Nordic and Baltic countries, sort of Scandinavia and Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. And a few terms, definitions to start off with, which I'll keep using through the presentation. So germplasm is just any plant material that can be used to reproduce that plant. And it's usually seed, but sometimes it's clonal, like tubers for potatoes or a cutting for a tree. Accession is germplasm from a collection event. So it's not the same thing as a variety, and this is quite important. It's simply the descendants of seeds collected somewhere at some point and put into the gene bank. So that can be like a seed company mails in a sample of a variety, or it can be some guy from the US Embassy stops at a market stall in Ethiopia somewhere and buys some chickpeas and sends it in. And what you get looks like a packet of seeds, but it is not a variety. It's a collection event, descendants from that. And the gene bank is simply a collection of those accessions, which are conserved to help plant breeders and researchers and farmers. Why go to a gene bank? As I said, it's a way for me to travel without traveling to find germplasm which isn't available elsewhere. But an important thing to just say right off the bat is a bit of a disclaimer that gene banks, and here I'm mostly working with national level gene banks, but they distribute seed to breeders and researchers. And their sort of goal is not to distribute to just anyone, but to aim for where they can achieve the biggest effect on our food system. So they try to multiply that effectiveness by aiming at people who will work with the seed and distribute it so that their benefit can expand. So as a seed company, I go there looking for stuff I can't find anywhere else. And before going there, I try to do my background research and only go to the gene bank if I can't find it anywhere else. And the balanced side of that is they're there to be used and they're there to be helpful. And so if there's something you're looking for which you can't find, this is a useful place to, it's a backup resource. And the curators who take care of these collections are very knowledgeable and friendly people. And so they're a great resource as well. And when I go to the gene banks, I sometimes, like high-level pros are often looking for a particular gene, like a disease resistance where they're looking at a wild crop relative or a land race of some crop, and they're aiming to breed that gene into their work. I'm usually not that sophisticated, and so I'm more often looking at something pretty domesticated, which sometimes it's like an old variety, which I can't find commercially anywhere. Sometimes I'm looking at land races from wherever that crop is domesticated, like you described, Andrew and Sarah. That same sort of thing, but using the gene bank collection. And sometimes it's for a category of crop where I can't find a good option otherwise. And so that's what I'm going to focus on in this case study. Dry peas. I am very fond of dry peas. I talk about them ceaselessly. And I divide them into two big culinary classes. And Andrew and Sarah, I think I saw in your title slide pictures of these, but white peas are the most familiar to most people. They have white flowers, and as dry peas, they have round seed, which is usually either green or yellow, and it's your usual split pea, which you'll see all the time. Gray peas have pink flowers and wrinkly seeds, and they're enormously varied. You can see 4 varieties in the picture here, but they can have large seeds, they can have very small seeds, they can be all sorts of different colors, and some are patterned and some are plain. What I really like about them is in our climate, it's very hard to grow chickpeas, and I have a lot of people come looking for a chickpea, and growing them in Ontario is rough. And so these have a very similar taste and texture to chickpeas, but they're way easier to grow. And both these categories of peas, they're also vegetable forms. So most shelling peas are over on the white pea side of the family, and then snow and sugar are over on the gray pea side. But a lot of the gray peas especially, a lot of them are big, tall, vining plants. And we grow too many of them to trellis them. And I knew that they were very common historically across Europe. And you can find still old varieties from Italy and the UK and the Netherlands and Denmark and Latvia, and all over the place. And so I was wondering, how do you grow these on a field scale? And in our climate is the other piece of that, because we're on the cold, short season end of sort of their historical range. And we have this problem that we get rainfall in summer. And so tall vines don't work well without trellis because they end up on the ground. And so I found Sweden as a comparable climate. And there they would often intercrop these tall gray peas with either grains or with fava beans. And so with intercropping, a key is to match your maturity dates so that everything can be harvested together. And what we found playing around with this is our very earliest maturing fava just barely lined up with our latest maturing pea, which was a white pea called Goldherbs from Poland. The Swedes have been using gray peas for this, not white peas. And so I went to the gene bank, Nordgen, looking for those late maturing gray peas. And so just a side note here, actually, there's research happening on this in Sweden right now. Last fall, a researcher there just released a paper, which I have cited here. So if you're really into that, it's worth looking this up. It's a really good paper. But this sort of search for a category I found is where gene banks are at their very best, because sometimes the data which they have lets me search and find stuff with greater nuance than I can just looking at other seed companies. So this is the opening screen when you go on Nordgen. And so we're going to walk through searching for those gray peas. And there are various ways you can do a search. A number of gene banks around the world use the American system, which is GRIN, the Germplasm Resource Information Network. Nordgen is one of these. Their system is called GenBis. So you can open it on their page, and then you get this simple search page. And simple search is great if you've got a keyword to search from. And so each accession in the system will have its own accession number. If you happen to know an accession number, you can search that way. Or if you're looking for a particular variety, like this corn falconer, or sometimes there's a rare species like northern sea oats, where there just won't be many accessions available. So then you can search that way. Or if you're looking for something from a particular place, like any varieties from wherever, you can use simple search. If you're looking for traits, though, you go to the top bar and select descriptor search. And this is really cool because when they grow these, the gene bank tries to record data every time on a whole host of categories of information. And then they load it into the system and you're able to search through that data. So for example, in this case, we do this series of drop-down tables to do a descriptor search. So we choose our crop, and my main criteria was time of maturity, so I went for the very late and late ones. And then you run the search, and I got 4 results on this search. And looking at them, I can see that they're gray peas just to look at. So that was very helpful. The problem here is the risk here with descriptor searches. If they don't record the data, it doesn't come up in the search. And so you can lose all sorts of stuff, which just wasn't recorded. On this particular one, this one accession, Cara, this is an accession page now. So this accession doesn't show up because there's no observation information recorded. But I am a history geek, and I love the information you can find in the system. If you go into the accessions, the passport section has information about where the accession came from. So here's a passport. And it tells you who donated it to the system or where they got it. And sometimes there are donor remarks, which are the cooperator who donated it will say something about it. And NordGen is really great for this. A lot of these accessions came from PALM, which is the Swedish program for the diversity of cultivated plants. And in the early 2000s, this program did this series of events across Sweden where they invited anyone who was saving seeds to come to the event and donate seeds for the gene bank and tell the story of the seeds. And so you go into the NordGen system and there are all of these great little donor remark stories with these accessions, which give you a window into Swedish agriculture, gardening and farming. And it's a really fascinating way. You can also search in the system by the donor. So you can go to the cooperator list. And so I did that with this, and I spent a lot of winter evenings and read all of the PALM accessions stories. And I don't speak Swedish, but Google Translate is a great help with this sort of thing. And so, for example, with this pea, Cara, I noticed in its donor remarks that it's described growing with a fava, and that fava is also available in the system. This was a great way with that particular project to add a few more accessions to the project. And it's a very inefficient way, but it's also a way to really learn about where the seed is coming from when you can't go there. So with these peas, I learned they have local dialect names. In the west coast of Sweden, in Bohuslän, they're called Raber peas, and at the south end of Sweden, Skåne, they're called Hogor peas. And so that let me do more research and read blogs and read magazine articles and all sorts of things online to learn more about the culture of these peas. Then in the system, you can do this requesting of germplasm where you make an account and you select accessions and add them to your wish list and then create an order. It's very straightforward, and the website walks you through it really well. And you can also make notes. You can see my notes here. But then they always ask you to explain why you're wanting the germplasm. And so I always write this little descriptive paragraph of my project. You can see here the particular one for this project. And then the curator who takes care of these seeds reviews that, and if they approve it, they ship you the seeds. And I so far have been approved for everything. They're very generous, working with NordGen and also with the American system, the National Plant Germplasm System, and the Canadian system, Plant Gene Resources of Canada. But before they'll do that, you need to accept the SMTA. So a little bit on costs and responsibilities. Most gene banks now require you to accept the standard material transfer agreement before they'll send you germplasm. And this is an internationally agreed upon document from the UN Food and Agricultural Organization, which it's very formal legalese, but basically it says if you get germplasm from a gene bank and then use it to breed something which you make proprietary, like put a patent or plant breeders' rights or plant variety protection on it, then you have to give FAO a portion of your earnings. They use that to run their programming. I support open access, open source seed, and so that's not an issue for me. But the rest of us who don't do proprietary stuff are invited to donate in that system, but we are not required to. And these 3 gene banks I've worked with all distribute germplasm for free. So you make your request and they give it to you. That's not the case for every gene bank. Some of them will charge for shipping and handling, so that's important to consider. This is why, for example, I've gotten nothing out of the Japanese Federal Gene Bank, because their fees are a little too high for my budget. And I also consider this is not required, but my understanding is that part of my responsibility in using this material is to help others with it. And so one part of that is giving them back all the information I can about what I did. So at the end of the season, I'll email them and explain my project involving the germplasm from them again and give them the results and any other observations I have, because that helps them to give more information to the next person who comes to the collection. So it enriches their collection because the information is really important. And also not required, but when I am selling a variety which comes from anything associated with the gene bank, I acknowledge them on my website in my catalog. So this is a white dent corn that I was breeding using germplasm from the US gene bank. And in the variety description, it gives all of the accession information so that other people know about it. And I think these are a really important resource. And so this is a way to publicize their value to those who get seed. A little ethical section here as well. There's rising concern about the appropriation of seed from oppressed people around the world. And gene banks have sometimes been considered to be part of that problem because of the way that they very widely collect germplasm and then distribute it. And so that's another value for me of the passport information, is that you can learn a bit about how it came to end up in the seed collection. And that's something I really like with these accessions from NordGen, from the POM system, because they came into this system with the understanding, with people donating them, with the hope that they would be used this way. So they come straight in with people hoping they'll be conserved and passed on and bred and shared. And that's a really good thing about the system. But it's not all good. There are problems with using things from gene banks as well. And the key summary here is accessions are accessions. They're not finished varieties. So as a seed company, I think a lot about this idea that with each of our varieties, we as seed companies sort of strive towards an ideal. And so we're constantly working towards our ideal vision of this plant. And that's not the job of a gene bank. The job of the gene bank is to conserve what they received. And so they do not do that same sort of selection, which sometimes that's fine and sometimes that's a problem. Accessions are not necessarily uniform. So this is a sample of a corn I was working with. And there's contamination in it, which I happen to know was not me, but I would guess happened before it came to me. There's also some disease risk with some of these. Another problem can be that accessions, as we said right off the start, are from collection events, and so there may be duplicates. With the gray pea project, I ended up with 8 basically identical peas with different names, but they look extremely similar when I'm growing them out. And yeah, another project working with the American system, I started with 13 accessions and ended up having 1, which I'm ongoingly working with, which is this grass pea here in the picture. Another thing is that this is just a sort of technical thing, but they don't have to meet germination standards, which seed companies do. And so sometimes these will germinate very poorly, and sometimes there are just too few plants to recover old varieties, if that's what you're trying to do here. So all of that means that cost is important, because these are not ready to go in the same way that seed from a seed company is. So I have far higher attrition with my projects using gene banks than I do when I get seed from another company and start there. But then another challenge, which I've found really interesting to think about as I work with these gene banks, is this idea of the culture around a seed, that any crop that's been in a place for a long time becomes part of a culture. It's not just genes held in the seed, but it's this whole, their tools, their practices for growing it and harvesting it and processing it, the whole process from the field or the garden to the table, which are part of this thing becoming actually a piece of someone's diet. And these hugor peas, these long season gray peas, are a great example of this. So Sweden, similar culture, similar climate to my area in Ontario. It's hard, even if you select well, to get your varieties to mature and intercropping well together. And so the Swedes adapted, and they built these wooden drying structures you can see in these pictures. And they're usually called hissja. And in Bohuslän on the west coast, they built these large structures called Krekemer. There are 2 pictures here from archives in Sweden which show them loaded with peas and favas. And this was a way that they adapted their varieties and their culture to the climate where they were working. And it really became a deeply cultural thing of the foods associated with these and the harvest. Like harvest was a big celebration, and there's still people who have fond memories of getting together with the neighbors and the special foods. And it was a lot of work, but it was also a whole culture around these seeds. And the gene bank doesn't pass that piece on. It does what's called ex situ conservation, where they save the seed, but they can't save this culture, the in situ, the gene bankers call it. And so a really key thing for me is that we aren't just moving seeds around. We need to learn about the cultures that they're coming from, and say, how are those cultures working with their landscape and their crops in a way which we can translate to our landscape and crops? And how does our culture need to adapt, not just moving seeds, but moving ways of doing and being? So that's sort of my growing area coming out of this gene banking work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Theo. I'm now going to invite Heather to activate your camera and share your screen.
My name is Heather Ramsey. I'm in Victoria, BC, Nami farm. I'm going to talk about how our farm uses seeds sourced from Japan and some thoughts on how you might do the same. Now, a few caveats before I start. We are a farm that produces vegetables. We save some of our own seeds, but we do not sell seeds. And so I'm speaking more as a farmer seed sourcer, as opposed to someone who's like spent their time focusing on collecting and integrating varieties. Also, I just want to say as another caveat, I'm not ethnically or culturally Japanese. And so I don't have insider knowledge of the culture around the seeds I'm going to be talking about, but I can speak from my own experience as someone coming to this as an outsider, which is also very interesting. So a bit about us. Uminami Farm actually started in Iwaki, Japan, which is this little red circled area a little bit north of Tokyo. The relationships that we use for sourcing seeds in Japan actually started back in the 80s when Uminami Farm was still operating in Iwaki. Those have continued as the farm moved to Victoria. Now, there is some difference in latitude. Iwaki is more like 37 degrees north. Where we are now is more like 48 degrees north. But we're finding that many of the same seed connections are still serving us very well here. So we are now in Chiano territory, Victoria, more precisely Machosen, BC. That is right down here in the southern tip of Vancouver Island. This is a panoramic shot of our farm. So what we do here is we specialize in Japanese crops. We specialize in year-round production using the variety of greenhouses that you see here, as well as some terraced outdoor fields. We're certified organic. We operate on a 10-acre parcel, but we're only actually cultivating 2.5 acres. Myself and the landowner are full-time managers, and then we have 6 or 7 part-time workers who come. And just to give you another idea of scale, we're doing gross sales of about 150,000 per year. We sell primarily through a year-round box program, so direct to customer. And you know, we do a couple other grocery stores and restaurants, but it's all clientele where taste and I guess cultural fit are really, really important, which is part of why we are sourcing seeds direct from Japan. These are our key crops. So our top 3 crops in terms of volume and revenue are in the center, daikon. On the left, you have kabu, which is a Japanese turnip. I know at least here they've become very popular under the name salad turnips. And then on the right, you have a crop called komatsuna, which is one of many Japanese greens that we grow. In all of these 3 crops, we are getting these seeds direct from Japan through a company called Watanabe Seeds, which I'll say more about a little bit later. Now, before I do that, I'd just like to talk very briefly about why we're sourcing Japanese seeds as opposed to looking within North America. One is simply that our farm is rooted in Japanese culture, and we were established here specifically for the purpose of providing vegetables to the Japanese community. This is back in the 90s. The farm moved here at a time when there was really nobody growing Asian vegetables around here. Now, at the present time, it's actually not that hard to find at least some kinds of Asian vegetables in North American seed catalogs, but there's a couple of different problems sourcing Japanese crops from Western seed catalogs. One is that in Japan, plant breeding tends to be very focused on attributes such as flavor and eating texture, but within the context in which these would be used in Japan. So for example, the komatsuna you see here, we have harvested as whole plants, which is the typical way it's done in Japan. You can find komatsuna in a number of seed catalogs now, but the thing is that in a Western context, these are typically put into boxed salad mixes where you don't need to grow the plant to full size. You just need a little plant that's going to produce leaves you can pick off individually. And so the stems might not have the same kind of texture that we expect at that larger stage. I think in addition to that, what we have found is that there's a very high emphasis on quality in the Japanese market. And so things like germination rates of the seeds we've typically found are very reliable. We are also able to get traits that are difficult to find in the North American market. For example, daikon being a biennial crop tends to bolt early if you plant it in the spring. But from Japan, we're able to source daikon that's been specifically bred for early season growing, so it's not going to bolt at cold temperatures. Also, you can find some clubroot resistant varieties in North America, like as of the last 10 years or so, but there's a far wider diversity of clubroot resistant varieties that we can access out of Japan. So in terms of the range of seeds that we're using, mostly purchased, some saved on farm, but we're using over 80 varieties of over 20 different crops. And that's just for the Japanese stuff that we're growing as opposed to like the Western stuff. So I'm going to talk about seeds that we either have sourced in the past and now save or continue to source from Japan based on kind of three streams within the Japanese seed landscape. One is farmer selection, i.e. seeds that have been selected and saved by farmers as opposed to seed companies as such. I'm going to talk about seeds from a natural farming center in Japan, and I'm also going to talk about seeds we source from a commercial seed company. All right, so farmer selection. At this time of year, one of our most important crops is a crop called kakina. It is basically an old oilseed crop that farmers selected for use for its greens. On the left-hand side here, you can see it makes kind of like a brassica floret type thing. This particular bunch is fairly late season when you've already harvested the center. You're just getting little side shoots that are kind of skinny now. But this is a crop that produces very well in the cool season, and actually I've found is even stronger than kale when it comes to surviving winter conditions. Originally, this seed was from Gunma, which is kind of like central Honshu Island, sort of like a little bit kind of inland north of Tokyo kind of a thing. And it was brought to Canada by a lady who immigrated from Gunma area. She settled in Victoria, saved the seeds for about 10 years, and then passed them on to us. And we've been saving these seeds now for, I don't know, more than a decade, maybe coming on 2 decades kind of a thing. Now, kakina, which I'm referring to here, the core variety is actually this upper right-hand picture, but in the lower left, where you see one of our fields, you actually see a lot of variation in the color and apparent texture of the leaves. That's actually because there's actually a suite of crops that all kind of fit in this category. And so the kakina as such is, like I said, from a friend of the farm from Gunma area. There's also norabona, which we got from Noguchi open pollinated seeds. Again, I'll say more about them later. Although it's been sourced from a seed company, it is still a farmer selected variety that was simply distributed through the seed company. Bansei kukitachi, which has got a more serrated leaf, you see on the left, picked up at a shop in Iwaki where the farm used to operate, but again, a farmer selected variety. And then Kawashima kakina, I don't have a specific photo here, but it's the kind of the lighter colored variety among the ones that you see in this lower right-hand picture. And that's one we got from the Natural Farming Center, which I'll talk about shortly. And so this has been a very important way for us to get a crop that does well in our climate, works with many styles of Japanese cooking, and also being open pollinated, we're able to save the seeds. And so we typically don't have to go back to Japan for this. The only exception being 1 year, we lost our norabona seeds. We had to go back to get a new one again, but we're basically able to keep these from year to year. Now, a little bit about the Natural Farming Center. They are in Nagano, which in my clumsy little map here is kind of right about here, Tokyo being somewhere here-ish kind of a thing. In Japan, the term natural farming refers to a style of farming not really practiced on a large commercial scale, but certainly popular among people who want a more environmental focus in what they're doing, because the idea of natural farming, as so-called, is that there's no tillage and no external inputs whatsoever. And so what the Natural Farming Center has done is continues to do, is they select varieties from the range of crops that you see on the right-hand side here that grow well under those conditions. Now, I will just back up for a moment here. I didn't say a whole lot about Japan's climate versus our climate here. In Japan, it is a far warmer climate. They've also got a very rainy summer and a dry winter. Here in my area, we are the complete opposite. Like the people at Adaptive Seeds, we have a dry summer and a wet winter. However, we're still finding some utility in experimenting with some of these varieties, especially because we're growing some crops in the greenhouse where you can modify some of those climate attributes. Specifically, what we've been getting from the Natural Farming Center is certain varieties of cucumbers that seem to have a bit more long-term production capacity. Well, I guess what I mean is they don't get tired as quickly. They tend to produce over a longer season than some of the other ones that we've gotten elsewhere. We've gotten some tomatoes from them that do well under low care conditions. And I think one thing that was particularly exciting for us is we actually get a lot of our lettuce seed from them. We now save it ourselves, but we got it originally from them. And what we're finding is not so much for the cold season, but for the warm season, these lettuces are even more heat tolerant than the heat tolerant varieties that we were looking at in the Canovi heat tolerant lettuce trials. But some of them also still do well in the greenhouse during the winter here. Now, the challenge of sourcing seeds from this Natural Farming Center, and I've listed the website here in case you want to go check that out. They won't mail seeds to you. If you go to Japan and find a way to connect with them, you could probably get seeds from them, but they will not mail them out. Now, some of these things are very relationship specific. We used to have a contact there who would actually package the seeds up and mail them to us, but that person's no longer part of the picture. And so if we do need to get new seeds from them, we're left with having one of our people go there and pick it up. But it remains an important source, or it remains a meaningful source, I should say, rather, for us because of the ability to get untreated seeds that are adapted to low input conditions, which suits our organic style of farming. Now, most of our seeds are coming from Watanabe Seeds, which is near Sendai. That's up here. So Tokyo being here, Iwaki, where the farm started, is here, and then Sendai is kind of up here. Well, even though the rainfall situation is completely opposite between Japan and our area, the temperature regime in the Sendai area is quite similar. So for example, if you look at like the record high temperatures, their highest highs tend to be around like the 37 degree area. We don't get quite that hot here, but we'll get 30s outdoors in the summers sometimes, and then certainly in the greenhouse, we're hitting those upper 30s. And in terms of the low temperatures for the winter growing, which is very important for us, they're sorry, where is that on here? Someone here. Okay, record lows. Their record lows are very similar to our record lows. We're typically getting a little bit colder in the summer than they are, but the record winter lows are extremely similar to what we're dealing with here. Watanabe Seeds deals in, they have breeding efforts over a wide range of crops. The specific ones that we're getting from them are with the mini tomatoes. They have some ultra tender mini tomatoes, the best on the market anyone has found. Like even like those mochi tomatoes that some of the seed catalogs are carrying here now. They're even better than those ones. We used to source our winter squash from them. I'll say a little bit more about that later. Eggplant, cabbage, Chinese cabbage, daikon, some of our green onions, our bulb onions, and certainly our Japanese greens are very important that we're getting there, as well as the Japanese turnips. Now, Watanabe Seeds has a really beautiful breeding facility and trial ground where we were able to visit when I was there back in 2018. This is a field where they're testing Napa cabbage. Similarly, here there are some of their cabbage varieties that they're growing. The stake on the left shows one that we grow every year. The stake on the right shows one that we're planning to use this year. Now, I mentioned earlier that daikon is one of our key crops. These are the 4 key varieties that we use for daikon. Not the only varieties, but the 4 key varieties. Now, the one you see here in the upper left is called Wakamiya Nigo. And the thing with Wakamiya is this is the one I was talking about where these seeds have actually been bred so that they're cold resistant and won't bolt if you sow them in early spring. This is the biggest complaint I hear from people when they try to grow daikon. They say, oh, I planted it as soon as my garden was ready in the spring and it just made flowers. Well, the reason it did that is because it's a biennial and it doesn't want to start off in the spring. It wants to start off in the summer. So Wakamiya breaks some of that pattern. It's still a little bit sensitive, but it breaks some of that pattern and enables us to get early spring daikon crops. The Takamiya and Motomiya that you see here, those are good mid-season varieties. And then Fuyunomiya is a really nice variety for going into the winter season. Similarly, Napa cabbage, we've been very glad to be able to source through Watanabe. Here's one of the varieties that we use at the demonstration ground. And so if you look at the seed packages that I've shown you here, you see this little CR in the upper right-hand corner of each of these. What that means is clubroot resistant. Watanabe Seeds grows a wide range of clubroot resistant Napa cabbage. These are only 4 of the many varieties that we grow. And so when we go to Watanabe Seeds, what we are able to get is not only the clubroot resistance, but also Napa cabbage that matures over everything from 60 to 80 days. And we're also sure of getting a Napa cabbage that has been bred to have the kind of eating taste and texture that our Japanese customers and also our Western customers will prefer. So I will give you this picture to look at while I just talk a little bit about our relationship with Watanabe Seeds. Now, we've been extremely happy dealing with Watanabe. They've been very accommodating. We are able to import legally from them using our Canadian import-export account. So it's just a matter of emailing them an order, they package it up, send it to us. It goes through the whole system and arrives via Canada Post, basically. Now, one of the challenges we've found is that although Watanabe is a Japanese company, it's not a multinational, anything like this, the seed production itself, once they've bred the seed, the actual growing out and producing of the seed could be done anywhere in the world. Like if you look carefully at the seed packages we're getting from them, the seed might be coming from America, it might be coming from China, it might be coming from Italy or somewhere else. And most of the time, we don't notice that as a problem in our day-to-day, but I mentioned earlier that I would say some more about why we no longer get our winter squash from Watanabe. And the reason is that even though we really love their varieties, the place where they're being grown for production treats the seed with fungicide immediately after harvesting the seed crop. And so whereas for everything else we're getting, we'll get Watanabe to give us a document that says, yes, all the seeds we're providing are untreated so that we can show that to our organic certifier. They are simply no longer able to source untreated seeds for those varieties. And so that means that we've needed to find other options, basically. Some of what we've done is we've tried saving seeds from the last set of untreated hybrid seeds that we got from them. And I say that, and I'm reminded to say that pretty much all the seeds we are getting from them are hybrids. That being said, we found that saving seeds off them isn't as hit or miss as we might expect from a hybrid variety, which is interesting. So we have saved seeds from some of the squash that we used to get from them. That being said, what we've done even more so is the combination of going back to the natural farming center that I was talking about earlier, getting kabocha winter squash seeds from them and then saving those ourselves. We've also been just trialing different kabocha seed varieties from various North American companies now that they're accessing seeds from Japan as well, so that we can try to hit on a mix of varieties that we're happy with. Now, I want to talk a little bit about, so having said a whole bunch about our relationship with Japanese seed suppliers and how we're using Japanese seeds, I would like to talk about how you might go about sourcing Japanese seeds and some general comments on the seed industry in Japan. One of the interesting things about sourcing seeds in Japan is that compared to other developed nations, Japan has a very high number of independent seed companies that are not part of national corporations. And this is specifically about vegetable seed that I'm speaking here. Most of these, not all, but most of these seed companies are family-run businesses that evolved out of expert farming families, even as far back as the Edo era, and turned into the commercial seed companies of today. Because these are long-term family businesses, that often have personal as well as business connections with each other, there are incentives besides profit that shape the landscape of commercial seed breeding and seed selling in Japan. For example, you might get a seed company keeping a variety alive because it's one that the grandfather of the family bred. Or you might have another seed company keeping a particular variety because their long-term farming customers like that variety. They might, for the sake of that relationship, keep the variety alive where they might have other reasons in some cases to let it go. It's not that varieties aren't being lost, but it is helpful that this landscape is it's a little bit of a, if you will, a milder climate for the seed industry compared to what I personally see in North America. Now, as I said before, plant breeding in Japan is very responsive to consumer demand. And so the commercial varieties that you can get are usually targeted to customer preferences like flavor, like texture, as opposed to making something that's good to ship. Now, beyond the commercial hybrid varieties, Japan has a very high diversity of traditional regional varieties. And this is partly because of the geography of the nation. And I'll see if I can find one of my, I won't try to navigate slides too much. This is partly because of the geography of the nation, where it doesn't show on this little map here, but it's a very mountainous country. And so you get all these like little pockets of microclimates and also of travel barriers that would have kept people more localized at a time when travel was more difficult. Also, historically, there have been periods where, for political reasons, people weren't able to move around as much. And so due to that combination of politics and geography, we've got these regional varieties that have adapted to, deep volcanic ash soils versus shallow mountain soils, that have adapted to the really tropical climates of, say, Okinawa versus the very cold, frigid climates of Hokkaido. And so within Japan, even the commercial seed companies will be adapting to these very different conditions. And then on top of that, you'll also have the more non-commercial or farmer-based seed savers who are, again, operating within that local climate. So let's talk about seed importing. So let's say that you were to wish to do like us and import seeds directly from Japan. One of the nice things is that under current trade agreements, for any small sized seed, and if you go online, you can find the definition, but anything that's like a brassica seed or something like this is a small seed. For seeds of around that size, a seed package under 500 grams can be imported without quarantine. It doesn't matter how many packages you import, as long as the individual packages are 500 grams or less, you can bring them in under your Canadian import-export account. It is really not that hard to set up. It felt very daunting to me at first, but if you have a business number, it's not that hard. I've showed this page, not because it's very exciting, but just because if you ever want to come back to the recording of this presentation and go here, you can look at the website, you can look at the list of what they ask you to do. Now, as I said before, within the wide variety of seed suppliers in Japan, some are set up to do legal import-export, some are not. So that's something that you will need to navigate as you explore which company and where you might like to try to get seeds from. Now, my suggestion would be start with climate. If we compare the climates of Canada and Japan, I've pulled maps of the Köppen climate classification system. You can see that the northern part of Japan does in fact have climates that are classified in some similar ways to parts of central interior Canada. Now, this does not include all of the temperature attributes. It certainly gets far colder in the farming parts of Canada than it does in the farming parts of Japan. Even in central Hokkaido, it doesn't get as cold as Canada gets. However, this might be something that could give you an idea of where you might start to look for something that might be interesting for you. So for example, just trying to do an exercise for pretending that I didn't have a prior connection to Japan, how might I go about trying to find something suitable? Using the extent of Japanese I do have, I typed into a Google Maps search, Japan seeds company Hokkaido. And I came up with this list of seed companies located in Hokkaido. Knowing that within Japan, the east and west parts of the country do have very different climates, the west part of the country having harsher winters, I specifically looked on the west side of Hokkaido, and I found this Snowbrand seed company. Here's their website. Their specialty, like many Japanese seed companies, they do have a specialty and then deal seeds from other companies as well to provide to their customers. Their specialty is actually forage crops, which is not necessarily our interest as such at the moment, but they do also deal a wide range of vegetable seeds, which they understand to be suitable for the climate that they're selling into. And so I have not tried to contact this company, but this is just an example of the kind of search you could do to start to find a place that might be a suitable source of seeds for you. Now, that being said, as you can see, this webpage is in Japanese. We are lucky now to have a number of AI tools, whether it's Google Translate. I've seen apps where you can take your phone and point it at something and it will read the writing and then translate it even in the font that it was originally in. That was very cool. However, as useful as these tools may be, you're probably going to want to have someone in your team who has some degree of knowledge of Japanese. It would be very helpful. People in Japan are required to study English as part of their basic education, but it's very rare that people are comfortable. I shouldn't say rare. You can't count on people being comfortable operating in English. It's possible that with the help of AI translation, you may be able to have email communication and so on like this. I don't know, but just be prepared that you're going to need to navigate the language aspect. And having someone who understands the situation of language and culture in Japan can be very helpful. If you can, go to Japan. Even if you have zero Japanese language, you can still wander into Japanese home and garden centers, which are amazing, wonderful places to visit. Don't give me money in a Japanese garden store. I will spend all of it. Besides the many very, very beautiful, interesting tools and supplies they have available, seed racks full of different kinds of varieties that in some cases could be hybrid F1s, but in some cases could be local open pollinated varieties that you might like to be able to try. But one way or the other, what I would really suggest is that you contact who you're interested in, let them know what you're interested in and why, and then start to build a relationship from there, because one way or another, having some kind of friendly connection can be very important to being able to get what you're interested in. Now, that being said, some seed companies are big enough that they have international divisions or affiliates. For example, Taki Seed or Sakata Seed, these have North American branches. They also have branches throughout Japan, where if you're able to get a hold of some of the English language divisions in North America, maybe they might be able to connect you with varieties that are, say, sold in a part of Japan that has the climate that you're interested in. It's worth a shot to take a look. One other company that I will highlight that you may be interested to look into is Noguchi Seed. The reason I suggest them is because they are specifically focused on open pollinated seeds. The package you see to the left here is the Norabona that I was talking about earlier in the farmer selected varieties. So this is a farmer selected variety that Noguchi Seed is providing to their customers. Noguchi Seed has a very strong ideological commitment. If you go to their website, you can actually find a statement they've written in both English and Japanese talking about why they believe in open pollinated seeds and why they want to make these available to people. This is the kind of company that if you were to reach out to them and say, hey, I'm a seed breeder in Canada and I really want to incorporate open pollinated germplasm, I wouldn't be surprised if they might be amenable to working with you. They are near Saitama, which is about less than 1 hour drive from Tokyo. It's a slight inland climate, but much warmer than Canada, so that may be a limiting factor. Nonetheless, could be something interesting to begin to look into. Now, we do also look to local seed companies when we source Japanese seeds. We don't personally source from all of these, but I've listed them just to give some food for thought. Full Circle Seeds, which does seed production very nearby us, has a number of Japanese mustard greens that I've looked at for just in case we lose the seed that we've been saving. West Coast Seeds now has a wide range of Asian crops. William Dam carries some varieties. For example, we actually get like our main Japanese cucumber, we actually buy from William Dam because we were able to figure out by comparing photographs in the Japanese seed catalogs and the William Dam catalog that it's actually the same variety that William Dam is importing. And if you look at the translation of the name, it becomes even more obvious. But our core Japanese communicator, cucumber, actually comes from William Dam seeds. Johnny's Selected Seeds has some good varieties. If you're looking for an open pollinated daikon, they have the only open pollinated daikon that I would recommend in North America. There might be someone not aware, but that's the only one I know of I would recommend. High Mowing Seeds has a variety of options now. Kitazawa Seeds in California specializes in Japanese seeds. And as I said, there's also American branches of Taki and Sakata. Now, going back to what I was saying earlier with William Dam, Johnny's High Mowing, when it comes to the Japanese greens, you are running the risk that these are seeds that, if they have been saved in North America for a while, may have been adapted to the salad mix market stream and may no longer be that well adapted to eating in the whole plant harvest style that's more traditional in Japanese culture. That being said, they are sources that could be worth looking into. For example, actually one of the musunas that we grow is from High Mowing Seeds, and we've been extremely happy with it. The texture is great, the flavor is great, no problem whatsoever. One thing I just will say, just as a sort of a word of sort of fun language and culture insight, when we talk about greens, you'll notice that a lot of these are like komatsu na, mizu na, karashi na. That na is a Chinese culture meaning greens, and it's the same, it has the same meaning and the same Chinese character actually as the choy that you see in a lot of Chinese vegetables, or the cai in like tatsai, for example. When you see na at the end of a vegetable name, it's not guaranteed, but it's probably some kind of greens. All right, I think that is what I had available for you. And I have certainly more I can say if there's some specific questions when the question time comes.
Thank you so much, Heather. I did have a question on daikons being prone to bolting. One participant was asking whether it was associated with cool temperatures or day lengths or both.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and if you had that information or maybe
okay, I don't know with certainty. I am
yeah.
given to understand. I don't need to show you my daikon seeds right now. I am given to understand that it is temperature dependent.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is because when we're growing spring daikon, we do everything we can to keep it warm. And it's fairly correlated that if you get a cold night, you're more likely to get more bolting, basically.
Got it. I have we just have like 2-3 minutes left until 2:30. So I just had a quick question around how much time did you find it takes to adapt a crop or a variety to your region? I know it's going to change from crop to crop, but I was wondering, Theo, Heather, and Sarah and Andrew, if you had a sort of bulk part timeline for acclimatization. I have in mind 3 to 5 years, but it can take longer for biannual crops, which have longer cycles. But I was curious if you have a sort of fork to work with for acclimatization.
In our case, we found that it's fairly, you get the seed, they grow kind of a thing. We haven't noticed a big lag time, but it's more about selecting, for us, because we're not seed breeders, it's been more about selecting varieties that are just plant and go kind of a thing. So I'd be curious to hear from the others how they found that.
Yeah, I've had some varying success with finding varieties and adapting them and seeing if they improve in our growing conditions. And it seems like there's a lot of layers to it, where so you have like, is it just not going to do well? Like there's certain things that you're never really going to adapt without crossing them and finding diversity that will adapt. Other times it's after 2 or 3 years of selecting and saving your own seed, you can get quite a, I don't know if it's epigenetic or like the microbes on the seed, or just like it just starts waking up and being more vigorous and more adapted to your growing conditions. But that's not necessarily true every time. It's just a trend I've seen after a few years, but that only goes so far. That's like a slight bit of improvement. Whereas selecting for out of a population that has the ability to adapt might take a very long time, depending on the species and what you're trying to achieve. So it's kind of a hard question to answer.
And did you have a response around the daikon, whether it's associated with temperature or day length? Do you have an idea?
I'm not sure. I think that it's mostly temperature sensitivity,
Okay.
like a premature vernalization.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of crops like chard and carrots and things that have that problem as
Yeah.
well. There are interesting things like kale where it has to be vernalized in order to flower, but it's also day length triggered when it flowers. So it will flower on the same week every single year for us, even irrespective of what temperatures there were, as long as it got the temperatures to trigger flowering over a certain amount of time. So it's interesting and complicated.
Yeah. Theo, did you have a response to this?
Um, I would also go with temperature. But in terms of acclimatization, with some things, I think I'm noticing like peas. The third year I grow a pea is sort of when I expect it to start acting normally. But other things like turnips, I really haven't noticed a whole lot of like abrupt change. Maybe a longer term one. I just haven't grown them long enough. I don't know, but not yet.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna have to bring this webinar to a close. I really appreciated Theo and Heather's um, the cultural component of like, where the seed comes from and how getting seeds is not just getting seeds in a vacuum. It comes with relationships and people and stories. And I realized with Sarah and Andrew that I initially proposed to have pictures of you talking about your trip, but then I also wanted to have some basic introduction to this webinar. So it'll have to be another. We'll have to just take this to another opportunity. Um, and I also wanted to share a map that Heather shared about the plant hardiness zones because we can really see, the difference between central, eastern Canada and western Canada. And, if there's growers in the call who are in regions, in the kind of dark green to light green, so around but in the 2A to 3B, if you're in these regions, please let us know because there's not a lot of you out there, and you're probably facing some unique challenges. Um, yeah, thank you so much for everyone. Please share your feedback to us. And we wished we had a greater discussion with everyone, but we really love to hear from the presenters. And we'll also share the name of a couple seed companies that are in Central and Northern Europe. Not being from a Germanic background, I always have a bit of a trouble with Germanic sounding names. But there's companies like Sativa and Satbo, and there's a whole group of biodynamic breeders in Germany as well. Yeah, we'll be doing other webinars in the next few weeks, and feel you can just check that out on our events page of our website. And again, thank you so much to the three presenters, the three speakers, as well as Sarah, Rebecca, and David, who have been quietly supporting me in the background.